for some reason with motorcycles, there's this whole ego image status symbol thing where the ego gets in the way for so many riders, especially in
Right.
LA. I mean, I'm from
Right.
LA. So, they want to put it on Instagram or Facebook. Hey, I went to Laguna on my BMW 1000RR in my brand new Dainese suit and my AGV Pista helmet, right? Um, can some of those guys and gals ride? They could probably do well.
Okay, Young Lee, I'm super excited to be talking to you today. Thank you so much for being on my podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah, no worries. Why don't you tell me your origin story of M1GP?
In a nutshell, my start with motorcycles was very similar to I think what a lot of Americans experience. First of all, my parents always said no every time I even blurted out motorcycle. So, you know, not under our roof, under my dead body, that kind of thing. And so, some of my neighbors, they had mini bikes, and then every time I pointed out, they said, no. So as an adult, I had a good job in LA, and I was, had a car and a nice apartment, all this other stuff. And I was, and then it hit me one day. Oh my gosh, I'm on my own now. I can get my own bike. So I started talking to friends, asking their advice, and the bikes, people that I respected. And if any of you guys are listening, I still respect you and appreciate your input, but looking back, it wasn't the best advice. Okay, so they were talking about, earlier model R6s, SV650s, things like that, and, solid machines. They definitely said steer away from getting a brand new bike, which is what I did. I mean, I got a used bike as my first bike, but my parents and my family, I didn't want to prove them right. So as soon as I got my permit, I invested in a bunch of schools. So I went to Reg Pridmore School, Jason Pridmore School, California Superbike School. This is leading to M1GP, by the way. After, I think, more than a dozen California Superbike schools.
So like a proper Asian, you invested in education.
Yeah, I wasn't even aware of that mode of thinking. You know how you kind of become your parents, and when they think, oh my gosh. So yeah, that's kind of what happened with the whole Asianness. I was just determined not to hear it from my relatives. We told you not to do that. So after going to a bunch of schools, and I'm being on the conservative side, I think I easily went over a dozen to a super school. And so I learned a lot. I was really enjoying my learning process and getting faster, getting better. And at one point, they even pulled me aside, and this isn't, not letting my ego get to me, because I understand they approach a number of folks that attend their school, but they did talk to me about becoming an instructor, and I just it didn't work with my work schedule.
So let me stop you here real quick.
Yeah.
Did you buy the bike before you did these schools, or did you go to schools first?
Yeah. So before I ever took my very first school, I had purchased my own bike, which ended up being originally was a 2002 Yamaha R6, which is a beautiful bike, blue and white stripe. But my co-worker at the time, who just had a son, backed into it because he had to go to the hospital right away, kind of panicked, and ended up totaling my bike. So I ended up getting a replacement 2005 R6 Raven. So it was all black, which I still have. But it was then, after that bike that I got, is when I took all the schools.
Got it.
So there were a few times where I used the California Superbike school bikes, but I'd say 80% of the time I was using my bike.
Nice.
So after these dozen or so schools, I pulled Dylan Code, Keith Code's son, aside, and said, Dylan, I've learned a lot at your school. Um, I was planning to race the next season, my R6. And I said, can you give me a nugget of information or a tip that's going to give me a competitive edge over the other guys? And I'm pretty sure this is really close to verbatim. He said, Young, I'm going to tell you what I tell a lot of guys, and it goes in one ear and out the other. He said, if you could put your pride and ego aside and go learn and ride and race the mini bikes, your learning curve is going to be so much shorter.
Mm.
And so I thought, I had to think about that. And I thought, like a lot of folks, wait, mini bikes? Here I am riding this badass R6 and attending your school, and you're telling me to go ride these little mini bikes. So I took his advice, and the Racing Association at the time, it was called CMRRA, California Motorcycle Road Race Association. It was run by Al Lyons, this guy who ran it with his wife for 16 years. Met a bunch of their racers and kind of, introduced myself, told them my backstory, and they, were very warm and welcoming. They kind of showed me their bikes, offered me to take a bike out for a lap or two, and then I was hooked. My very first mini bike, which I raced for many, many years, and a number of them, was a Honda NSR50. It was a two-stroke, purpose-built mini GP bike built by HRC, actually. Love it. I still love it. I still have a couple. And so I was able to apply all of my skills that I learned at the schools on that bike and really kind of push the limit. And so for sure, my learning curve was a lot shorter. And in fact, it took a 6-month period off of the big bikes just to kind of put the theory to the test. And I went back to the 600 after 6 months just to kind of see, to put the mini bike training to the test. And so I met up with some of the Superbike school students that I was going to Superbike school with. We went to Las Vegas Motor Speedway, and I jumped on the R6 for the first time. And for sure, my riding improved, and lap times improved. Just everything. Very positive feedback from fellow riders and the school. And so that was sort of the proof in the pudding for me. And so while this was all happening, we get to now 2008, and I'm a dedicated CMRRA racer who loves it, and I'm trying to keep it alive because Al Lyons at the time, the owner of the club, ridership was going down. He had some competing clubs that were doing, they were just very aggressive competitors. And on top of that, as I'm sure you remember, 2008, the economy tanked, right? So,
That's
right. Actually, originally M1GP was formed to be sort of a track day, mini bike track day company to get people to experience mini bikes and then go race CMRRA. And for those of you, some of your watchers may know and remember CMRRA. Some famous names came from CMRRA. John the Hopper Hopkins, Tommy Aquino, Josh Heron, Elena Myers. Later on, towards the end, it was Benny Solis Jr., Joe Roberts. Joe Roberts did an M1GP, maybe 1 or 2 events, but I met him when he was a little kid, and I met his dad and his brother, and they were racing minis with CMRRA and Al, and so it was an important club, and it was really unfortunate. I remember the day too. It was March 12th, 2009. That after our efforts with M1GP and CMRRA, Al used to send out a mailed newsletter, but he gave me a phone call because we were chatting, and he said, Young, I gotta close the doors. Sherry, his wife, we talked about it, and unfortunately we have to close the doors. I remember my heart sank, and I just
Mhm.
felt I understood it, but it still was a bummer because I just discovered this thing, right? And Al announced it to me because he knew my efforts with M1GP originally, which was to bring people into the club. He I didn't just get the phone call. I think he made that phone call to his core group of racers.
Right.
But I was the one dumb enough to say, no, I love this thing, and I will, carry on the tradition.
Right.
So I didn't buy out the club. Some people think that, but no. I never wanted to be on the organizational side of racing. I wanted to just go out and race.
Right.
And still see people who come out and do that and say, "Oh, you're so lucky. You don't have to deal with all the work, right?" Um, but no. So I didn't buy out the club, but I I kind of embraced the cause, so to speak, and with his blessing.
Right. Okay. And so here we are now in 10 years later, 2020, and you guys are holding, other than the fact there's COVID and coronavirus and all that, you guys are holding events.
Yeah,
How often do they run? And are you on the same track, or is it like a series where you go to different tracks? How does that work?
I think having a variety of circuits makes a lot of sense, not only from an interest point of view, but also just from learning, right?
Hmm.
You learn different corners, different characteristics of different circuits, from the asphalt difference to, you know, just the type of turns and elevation change. So I like it that way, and I like it. I like to be able to offer a variety in our series. And over the years, we've gotten feedback from racers that have gone on to Europe, or race in domestically, and the feedback has always been, oh, I'm really glad that I got to have that experience in my developing years with the mini bikes. So no, we have I think M1GP out of the entire country, at least for most of our existence, we've had the largest variety of circuits offered in a mini bike series.
Mini bikes. If I was to go to one of these races, if I wanted to race,
Hmm.
what qualifies a mini bike? Is there a CC restriction?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's no hard and fast definition. I think it differs from different parts of the country to all around the world. I know in Europe they call it mini-moto, and even then, mini-moto can mean pocket bikes. If it's more for racing, it's generally called mini-moto. In our series, it's everything from a CRF 50 with road tires, then KX 65s, Ohvales, XR 100s, CRF 125s, up to our series goes up to 400cc sport bike and up to 549cc supermoto. Typically, 150 four strokes, those are typically the cap of most mini bike or mini moto organizations.
Okay. Yeah, that's super interesting. Now, in terms of cost of racing,
Mm-hmm.
how much would I need to do a season worth of racing?
From about $500 on the low end, um, depending on how ratted out the bike is. But for a decent shaped bike, you can find one for about $500 on the
Okay.
Sierra 50 side, and it can get as expensive as five to $10,000 for a mini bike. So it
Mm,
depends on what level you want to be racing at. Um, I know some guys that in total have dumped close to $10,000 in their Grom. So they get the Grom, they get all the suspension mods and performance mods, and they say easily it's close to 10 grand. So, and then the Ovales that are pretty popular right now, which I'm
mm,
involved with Moto America and the Moto Mini Cup. That's all Ovale spec racing, and those bikes brand new. They range from close to, I don't know, just over 5 grand to over 7 grand. But and a lot of people say, whoa, they're sticker shocked by that, but that's fresh out of the crate with slicks. All you need to do is add fuel and oil, and you're pretty much ready to go. So If you think about what it takes to get a comparable level of performance out of a, say, a KX65 or a Grom or anything like that, then it becomes a lot more, cost comparable. So,
So but that's just the bike, right? I mean, there's racing fees, there's entry fees.
yeah.
So how much is that a whole season?
A whole season, it's going to vary because we vary our tracks, and they charge us different fees. The bigger tracks charge us more. But I would say, generally speaking, maybe on average, let's just go for a round number, $150.
Yeah, $150 is not a lot. I mean, that's like a track day. That's an expensive track day,
Yeah.
with lunch and everything, right? And having somebody transport your bike. That's what I used to pay for track day. So $150 it's amazing.
Yeah, well, it's mini bike racing and track days in schools is definitely a lot more cost effective. But yeah, there are other costs like transponder rentals. It depends on how. I mean, there are guys who come out to our races with full tire warmers and top of the line racing gear. So,
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's good. Serious racing.
Yeah, yeah.
What is this geared to? I assume that you have a lot of younger, kids who attend the school and the racing series to develop into the next level of, big bike racing, as it were.
Yeah, I'd say most of our ridership is adults, because, and a lot of them, they've done track days, they've done other, big bike racing, and they discover mini bikes a lot like how I did. People get the whole relationship between go-karting and pro driving, but for some reason with motorcycles, there's this whole ego image status symbol thing where the ego gets in the way for so many riders, especially in LA. I mean, I'm from LA. So, they want to put it on Instagram or Facebook. Hey, I went to Laguna on my BMW 1000RR in my brand new Dainese suit and my AGV Pista helmet, right? Can some of those guys and gals ride? They could probably do well if they come to a clinic. And some of them, thankfully, some of them can put their ego aside and make it to our school. But and other similar schools, there's a lot of other, reputable and worthy schools to go out to.
Right.
But to answer your question, so the majority of folks that get involved with M1GP, whether it's through the clinics or it's our racing series, are adults. So.
Yeah, I remember the first track day. Actually, my first racing school that I did. I think I don't remember the CC. It could have been 600 cc's. I don't quite remember. And doesn't matter. They're regular size bike. And I remember vividly everybody getting their helmet on, getting the bike, and the instructor's like, "Okay, guys, now you're gonna follow me, and we're gonna go slow. I want to teach you what a line looks like." I said, "Yeah, I got this." And so I remember the first session he's going, and I'm like, "God, this is so boring." I'm like, like half asleep, going, "I can go much faster." As I know I can, I know I can, know I can. And then by the third session, he's like, I've been riding at about 10%, so I'm gonna go a little bit faster, and not try to keep up, but see if you can follow." And that's when I realized I didn't have it. Like, I had no talent for racing. I had no talent for riding. And the whole time I thought, wow, I was going like the fastest guy in the group. They're going to discover me. Oh my God, you're like the youngest protege or the oldest protege, or, my God, you're like a savant on the bike. And then I quickly realized on the first track day that I was like super useless. So that's why I think it's kind of cool to be racing in an M1GP.
Well, thanks. I agree with you on that part, but I also think because I've heard some of the other interviews you've done, and I know you talked about crushing, and I think you're being a little hard on yourself. Did you make that judgment on just one track day?
No, I mean, I've done a bunch more, and I knew I was never gonna be fast. I realized I was much more of a poser than I ever. I'm a better poser in my full leather gear, in my nice Arai helmet than I ever would have been, doing serious track days. I just didn't have it, right? And nor did I have the desire to really better myself in that sense.
and I take what you said as maybe a little bit of a challenge because we've trained people that have never been on a motorcycle before at our clinics.
Wow.
The only requirement is that somebody be proficient on a bicycle, and we've had people dragging their knee left and right. These people that have never ridden a motorcycle before, and midday or sometimes sooner, sometimes later, you wouldn't guess that that was their first day riding a motorcycle. So if you ever make it out here, you have an open invite to a clinic, and even if you don't want to race, if you want to just see what it's like, you may be surprised at how much your riding skill improves. So
Yeah.
I'll put that
I
out.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I definitely once the airlines open up and once everything normalizes, I'd be more than happy to come out.
Oh,
Yeah, and that sounds exciting. One of the things I found interesting is really how many good people who've come out of this M1GP program. And
and
you listed a bunch of them right off the bat. Uh,
well,
why?
to be
Yeah.
fair, the folks that I mentioned earlier, they although they came from mini road racing, like I did, they're all 98%, 99% of those people came from Al's Club. But we have had kids that came from M1GP that cut their teeth with our series, that went to the Red Bull Rookies Cup, went to race in Spain under for the CEV Championship. So we have had kids that have had some greater success outside after they left, went on for bigger and better racing. There's some guys who are racing in Moto America right now, um, that came from M1GP. So, um, and I'm working with a young gal. Her name's Jasmine Nichols. That's the one I have to work on the website tonight. But she she came to our clinic. I guess she went up north when she first started riding, and as a new rider, I guess some of the guys she was racing with um, blamed her for a crash. I guess the story goes, I didn't see it. And they basically told her, you shouldn't be in racing. So her dad came down. They live in Sacramento. They came down to our clinics at Willow Springs, drove, I think, 5 hours,
Wow.
and they were consistent. It wasn't just one sporadic. They had heard about M1GP in our school, and I've been working with her ever since. That was a couple of years now, and she is now developed her skills. She beat some of those guys she was racing with, and and I hope that she goes on. There's a talk about AFM and hopefully Moto America, and so um, in that sense, I really enjoy working with young riders. I like to see them progress, and that in that sense, we're continuing the tradition that Al Lyons started. So all those names I mentioned before, that I knew was an important part of the whole program to help develop the riders of the future of the sport.
Hmm. So how does that tie in then with Moto America and the kids that are in your school and your racing program today? Is there a tie-in? Do you guys have a collaboration going on?
Well, loosely there was a tie-in. I mean, right now, last year, 2019, they had their first sort of official in Pittsburgh. They did one Ohvale Mini Cup round, and
Hmm.
I guess that caught the attention of some of the higher ups at Moto America, and they decided to do a 3-round series this year. And obviously, coronavirus is, impeding that a little bit. But so I'm on board. They assembled a group to kind of pull this off, and uh, I'm fortunate enough to be part of the team. So I'm their race director for all 3 rounds, or originally planned all 3 rounds. So it's becoming more and more of a tie-in with what existed for many, many years, including with Al and other clubs across the country, just as these different regional clubs. And I think what Moto America is trying to do is work with these regional clubs and then bring the talent across the country into this series with Moto America, and then help develop those riders into higher level classes. So that I think is the plan.
Yeah, speaking about racing in general, and I've asked other people on the podcast, and I'll ask you the same to you. Why isn't motorcycle racing much more popular than it really should be, right? I mean, you think about the dynamic of watching a human being on a vehicle, and you can see their body language. It's not like an F1 car, it's not like an Indy car, it's not even like NASCAR where
Yeah.
you have less of connection with that person maneuvering the vehicle around. Like, why isn't it super popular?
I have my theories, and I've had the opportunity. One thing, being involved, even though M1GP is still very much a grassroots level organization, I've had the opportunity to meet some important people in the sport, even at the pro level, and I've been able to touch on the subject with some of these people. Um, from MotoGP level down to, this level. And, I asked that same question you just asked me when I first got into it, um, just this green guy new to the sport. I mean, that I think is a common question. And over the years, I've learned, and I actually learned pretty quickly, that it's a multi-layer, multi-level problem. uh, you know, and interviewing people at the MotoGP level, interviewing industry people here in the United States, um, to Al, who ran that thing for 16 years and saw some of these kids come into pro racing. So I think it's everything from, America being car culture, and we're so spread out, versus Asian countries, European countries, where two wheels are so much part of the culture, and so much more popular, and it's part of their youth experience, part of their whole experience as motorists, right? Where in the United States, it's more of a luxury or a hobby. So many people are exposed to dirt bike riding way more than they are to street bike riding.
Right.
And also part of the problem that, I had to used to be careful. I used to have to be careful on how I said this, because, but over the years, it's become more. I think the industry's become more aware and accepting of the small bike, because for years, when I first got into it, it was, you know, bigger the better, the sexy, 600s or 1000s, and I think that the marketing for the motorcycle industry, although that's worked for so many years, in some ways I think it also kind of hurt them, because a lot of folks would skip, instead of a European or Asian tiered system where you learn how to ride, you jump on one of those machines. Too many people were jumping on those big bikes too quickly, and so they might have an accident or worse, and so that's horrible marketing, right? So if you and I have that experience as our first time or early on, we're gonna say, no, I want to have a family. I want to have, a future. So that was fun, but versus if they actually learn how to ride and can do it safely and with control, then they have lifelong customers and fans. So there's just a few things.
Yeah.
Also the various barriers to the sport. I can tell you just directly with M1GP. Um, right now in our rider clinic program, we provide the bikes. If you don't have gear, we provide rental gear. We don't provide rental gear, but we provide rental gear. So everything from boots, leathers, helmets, because those are expenses, right?
Right.
Whereas, soccer or football, minimal
Sure.
minimal equipment to buy.
Well,
So
I gotta have to disagree with you on a couple of things. On one thing, the
I'm
cost of
all ears.
yeah, no, the cost of gear is what it is. I mean, you think about it, hockey is super expensive. And I would even say, arguably, that hockey may even be more cost, it might cost more than motorcycle gear. And yet, hockey is quite prevalent, obviously, in Canada, but in a lot of parts of the States as well. It's not really, you know, that lackluster. So that I don't agree with, but I understand that it's hard to find leathers for younger kids. That's what I hear all the time. It's really they all grow them quick, and it's not a lot of people making them.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I think the gear is part of the problem. Like I said, this is a multi-layered problem.
okay,
Um, Having access to tracks, um,
that's a big one.
that's so. Then you are now talking about travel to tracks, especially if a series like M1GP, we have a variety of tracks. Now you're asking people to spend money on hotels, gas, and all that kind of stuff. So it adds up, and it definitely, in our series over the years, the people who really get into it, the kids and the adults, they'll say, okay, I'll accept that's part of the cost. But a lot of folks, when they first come into it, um, it's and for me, I'm used to it. Driving 3 to 5 hours to a track, that's normal. But
Yeah.
for folks that are just getting into it, oh my gosh, that's a huge time commitment.
Yeah, it's funny how you're talking about earlier, right in the beginning, you're talking about the bigger bikes versus, like a tiered system, right? Because
Mhm.
I can relate completely. My then girlfriend was talking to a bunch of her friends, and their boyfriends were around. So it was like a group of like 20 people, 10 guys, 10 girls kind of thing. And I wasn't there. I went to the washroom or something. Anyways, they were talking about bikes, and a bunch of guys are like geeking out. They're like, "Oh yeah, we'd love to learn how to we'd love to ride a bike one day. Oh my god, bikes are so cool." And then my girlfriend at the time, she's like, "Well, he rides." And they're like, "Oh my god, does he ride? Really? Does he have a 600?" And you know what she said? She goes, "He would never ride a bike with that small." She goes, "I don't know what CC it was, but she goes, there's no way he'd ride a 600. It's too small." And she was right. Right? I went straight from a 600 right to a 929, right? Like CBR 929, and thought I was the man, right? And
Yeah.
again, looking back, I would have done better had I stuck with the 600. So,
Yeah, yeah. No, it is unfortunately, people bought into that, and they still do. Um, that whole ego status symbol thing. I mean, I still hear it today, where these folks that have a chip on their shoulder. I forget where it was, a bike night, I think, and you know, talking about a 600 to one of the guys. I said, "Oh, is that your 600?" He says, "Oh no, you know, a
yeah.
600 would be good for my girlfriend." And I just thought, okay, okay, buddy.
Nice.
uh, so unfortunately, that there is part of the barrier, or you know, I think one of the many factors as to why um, people's perception of motorcycle riding. I mean, on one, it's a double-edged sword, because part of what makes motorcycling cool is that not everybody can do it, and it requires skill.
Mm,
Um, the other part of it is, not everybody can do it, and it requires skill, and because of that, they don't have that skill, and they get hurt. And so, if you're trying to grow uh, motorcycling or motorcyclism or motorcycle racing, you know, on one hand you're going to attract some people, and on the other hand you're going to scare some people away. So that's why, and calling it mini moto or calling it mini bikes, it's just not very sexy sounding, right? So that's been a challenge of M1GP. People ask me, what does M1GP stand for? And before I even as a kid, um, I watched TV, and I would hear Formula One or F1, right? The F1 logo. I thought, wow, that looks cool. It sounds cool. I can remember it. And so when people ask me about M1GP, um, they're always trying to guess, what does the M stand for? What is the one? And everything. And I just, um, people find meaning in it, Moto 1 or first place, and they get what GP stands for, right? Grand
Of
Prix.
course.
But I just said, when I came up with the name and the logo, it didn't really matter. It was easy. People got that it was motorsport and motorcycle, because there was F1 and there's M1. So, but anyways, I went off on a tangent there.
No,
So,
good. That's the format, by the way. We're
okay,
good. There's
okay.
no set.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So back to the problem. It's multi-leveled. It's not just
Yeah.
one thing that's making it. And of course, I've heard of other people explaining it. It's also just attention span. There's only so many people. There are only so many sports, and there's only so much time. And so, with all those factors added into the fact is there's already football, baseball, and basketball, right? We don't really have enough audience
See, so
to
I'm
support.
gonna I'm gonna volley this back to you because you disagreed with me with hockey, and I'm
Yeah.
gonna throw that back at you because I remember when hockey first started coming to the States, right, with Gretzky and everything, and there were people who were like, "Oh, hockey's not going to catch on here in America," and
Right.
you know they were obviously wrong. Obviously, they hockey they invested the money and the advertising to make it successful, so they had that advantage, you know. And I also saw some of your interviews where you talk about personalities and things like that, where that could help the growth of the sport. I think there the solutions out there. It's just a matter of getting the right formula and the right people involved. And
Mm,
because if you look at, and I was talking with this, but with some other guys recently. Um, Look at what British mini bike is doing. If you YouTube, check this out later. Um, British mini bike, when they cover a mini bike race, it's covered like a Moto America race or a Moto GP race. They
mm,
have in corners. They have live commentary when somebody crashes. Oh, Jimmy Johnson went down in this corner. Oh, he's standing up and he's fine.
yeah.
Or if there's a battle, they make it exciting. They make it that even at that grassroots level, people learn the racers, they learn about the sport, and they tune in, right? And so they're ahead of the game, just like in Japan. I hear people are on waiting lists to get in Japan to race in their series, right? So, South Africa, everywhere. So I don't know. The successful formula is out there, right? I know you talked about NASCAR model.
Right.
Um, the successful motorcycle model is out there. For whatever reason, over the years, um, and I have my proposal. I'm working with some folks in the background, and I'm working with Moto America right now. Hopefully, what they're doing, I think they're taking steps in the right direction. And just in case I have my own plan B, and hopefully they'll maybe be compatible. But if not, I do believe there are successful formulas that mimic what is proven to be successful in other countries.
Yeah.
Um, it's just about getting the right people involved sometimes, and maybe that's the challenge.
Well, I mean, with Corona the way it is, I think motorcycle racing is the perfect sport to participate in, right? You're already socially distancing because you're wearing a full face helmet, right?
Yeah.
The track is big enough you can support 5,000 people and still put the seat in the middle. So to me, this is almost a blessing in disguise. This is now the time to get the sport out there because we can practice safe social distancing and have a hell of a good time doing it. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, I appreciate your podcast. Um, I didn't know about Shiny Side Up until I looked at some of your interviews, and I'm really happy that you're doing it. Um, as I think I communicated with you earlier, we're also trying to get the spotlight on the video a little bit. So maybe what we're doing and what others are doing, Moto America, maybe collectively we can get more folks involved, more interest in the sport. But yeah, I think like you said, especially with the whole virus issue, um, yeah, it's interesting because some people there's people on both sides of the spectrum, right? As far as opening back up. But whether we do sooner or later, you're right. This our sport lends itself to being pretty protective,
Mm,
against
mm,
that. But even with that, right, there's still stuff in the pits. Like just to go back to our endurance race, for example. I've already talked with our staff as well as some of our racers. When somebody pits in, typically pre, COVID, bike comes in, you got 5, 6, you got the entire team around the bike, folks getting ready to fuel, changing riders, getting a drink, handing, so that has to change. We already are figuring that out for this season. Hopefully we'll be able to pull it off in September, but steps are already being taken, how to navigate that safely and still have, a fun time.
mm.
So yeah, but we'll see.
Yeah. So let's step back to the school because that's of high interest to me.
That's
Um,
what you're gonna do.
yeah, yeah, I want to get back to no, seriously. I think the schools it's pretty cool because
Yeah.
what is the course curriculum like? I'm acting very, very Asian right now. What is the course curriculum like,
So
and
first step would
what
be,
are the steps? Have you figured out the magic steps in teaching somebody to go fast?
uh, so that would be pretty boastful of me to say that,
You're
right?
allowed to. If you've
No,
got it, you've got it.
you know, so part of my Asian humbleness, there's Asian cockiness and there's Asian humbleness. I don't,
Yes,
I try not to have the Asian cockiness,
all good.
but but no, the secret to going fast, I would never make such a claim.
Right.
I think there are some universal methods that a lot of schools around the world teach and have accepted to be proven methods.
Mm,
And so we incorporate those in our school. What sets us apart from other schools is that we've embraced the whole mini bike platform. Our my ego. I have a 600. I can
mm,
ride probably faster than some folks
mm,
who maybe ride those bikes regularly. Why? Because of my mini bike training. Some
mm,
people are going to go see this and say, "Okay, well, I want to put it to the test. Tax is cheap," but I can say that with a fair amount of confidence because of my training, the schools I've gone to, and the methods that we teach, and the people that have come to our schools over the years, um, that I've trained and some of our staff have trained. And then when they come back and they say, "Oh my gosh, my lap times at the track day improved," or my race that I entered, I made this much improvement. They show me lap times. So I'm pretty sure it's that's validation. And again, a lot of the schools teach it. But to answer your question, I think what kind of gives M1GP kind of an edge over some other schools, if it has one. I still think so many great schools out there with the big bike, but what the mini bike allows a rider to do is explore limits more
mm,
without greater consequences, right? So instead of going a buck 20 in a corner and trying out some new technique and getting it wrong, and then see the bike do this and it's a yard sale, and then possibly you're injured as well. Typically at an M1GP school, if somebody pushes the limit, dust themselves off, pick the bike up, and keep learning throughout the day. So
wow.
um, yeah, so that's so although I'm not giving you the answer you wanted about the magic to speed, there
Mm,
is something to be said because also if you listen to or watch videos with some of the top racers in the world, Valentino Rossi, Jorge Lorenzo's father, Chicho, who I've talked with over the years, and a lot of the Dorna MotoGP guys, they still train. They can afford. These are guys who can train and afford the best equipment, the best methods, the best personal trainers. And what do? They incorporate mini bike training in their regimen because of that. They can push the
mm,
limit. They can try
mm.
different things with uh, little to no consequence.
Really? That's surprising. I did not know that. I thought they were just all practicing on dirt bikes.
Oh, no, no, no. Yeah. Yeah. If you YouTube it, you'll see. And back to karting. when I was following Formula One years ago, but I would still hear people like Michael Schumacher or these top F1 drivers that would still go back to karting, and there was no ego and image there. They just thought, their fans and their fellow drivers, they're like, oh, of course
Hmm.
you're going to go back and keep your skills sharp in a go-kart, right? But with the bike thing, there's something different there. I don't we got to break that wall down.
So that's the key, right? How to break it down so that mini motos are sexy and cool to have.
Yeah, well, and it's been helping in part because the industry, I think, has embraced smaller bikes in this
Mm-hmm.
in the
Yep.
United States. I mean, they have elsewhere in the world, but in the last 10 years, it's the smaller bikes have grown in the United States. And then, things like the top riders actually showing videos of them practicing on mini bikes, that certainly helps, you know,
Mm.
because
Mm.
I can tell you right now from my own experience, some of the guys who have the chips on their shoulders, like, oh, I'm going to look, they'll say some, I can't, you might have to beat this out. They're going to say, I'm going to look like a gorilla for
Mm.
football. And please, please don't include that in this. But, that's what they're saying. And I say, you know what? Do you think you're better than Rossi or Marquez or Lorenzo? Because guess what? They're training on these guys, right?
Yeah.
Do you think they're, they look silly? So,
Huh. Yeah. I think no. I'm from Toronto, Canada. So and there is a noticeable increase of smaller bikes.
okay.
And I think there are two factors in Canada, especially in Ontario or even Toronto. Number one is the smaller bikes, the 300s, look more like a proper bike than ever before.
Yeah.
Right? They look like the 600s, they look like the 1000 cc's. So that help. Number
Yeah.
two is the extreme high cost of insurance. Okay, I still have my CBR 929, and that costs more than my car a year,
Wow.
right?
Okay.
And in Canada, the stereotype is true. We had snow like last week,
Hmm.
right? There is no there you cannot park the bike during the winter. You can't take it
Wow.
off insurance. If you take it off insurance, and you can stop your insurance. Um, I think you actually have to pay up no matter what. But on top of that, next year when you try to renew your bike or you try to get insurance again, they'll just treat you as a new rider, and then your rates skyrocket to
Wow.
like 3 4 times what it is when you've been riding for years. I've been riding for enough time that I was surprised at the cost of my bike, and it's a 20-year-old bike, a
Hmm.
CBR 929. I'd have bought it in 2000. That it still costs more than my modern car. Like I drive an electric car, and the insurance
Hmm.
is more than that. That's crazy.
Well, we definitely need to get you out here in California where we'll get you on some twisties then.
All right. And then you're gonna realize, oh, Eric was not being humble. He really does suck. There's no helping him, bro.
Oh
Like,
no.
go sit in the corner over there. Just wait it out. End of the day. No, I'm kidding. Um, what is it like? Okay, let's imagine this. Walk me through it. I
Mhm.
get this. I get to the school.
Yep.
Sit down. There's a
You don't sit down.
there's no sitting. Okay, standing up right
Okay.
away.
Yeah.
You suit it up. You sit. You get to the class, and what is that? Walk me through a life or the
Sure.
day of a track day
Sure. Sure.
yeah.
Okay. So suggested arrival time is 8:30.
Okay.
We start at 9 sharp. It's important to be punctual because it's not fair to the others to get there on time. We have had over the years a couple of uh, repeat offenders that just cannot get there on time, but they show up. Guess what? With a fresh Starbucks in hand, and so we really try to discourage the individual being more important than the rest of the group. So people show up on time, and if they don't, then we chide them a little bit. But right at 9 o'clock, we start with a quick introduction so we all know who we're all riding with and at what level they are. And that is for everybody's benefit, including the organization. In case we do have a brand new rider or somebody has an injury they're dealing with or something else, we find that out. Then we start with a track walk make sure everybody's clear on safety, track entry, track exit, what to do in a crash, introduce some things specific for that track direction. And after that, we do a quick bike overview, and then we get everybody geared up. And we just walk them through, everybody at their own pace. Sometimes in a single clinic, we'll have somebody who's very experienced versus somebody who's brand new. And so we'll separate them into two groups. And our instructors, including myself, will then tailor it to each individual within some window, right? So we can still move as a group, but meet everybody's needs throughout the day. So then we start with drills, and we generally, it's kind of morphed over time. Originally, we did drills, then track time, drills and track time, alternating throughout the day, lunch break, a mock race, optional mock race that most people just love, and when they find out, oh my gosh, there's a mock race, and people get so into it when they win.
Right.
It's fun to see because they're applying what they've learned, right? And then for the balance of the day, after they've gotten to a certain level, we work with them one-on-one on whatever it is they want to learn. And that's typical for level 1. And it takes, actually, it's not uncommon that we'll have a rider come out for our level 1 for, half a dozen to a dozen times. And then if they graduate from level 1, then they get into level 2, and then there's level 3. But that's generally how a clinic is run. But it's, like I said, it's morphed over time. So now we focus a little more on drills. It's a little more drill heavy on the first part of the day. And since we've modified it that way, there are less instances where people are getting in over their head, and it's a little more controlled. And so I think overall it's been a good move to do that.
So you still split them up in groups. How big is each group? What's the size like?
So it's it varies. It varies from we usually cap it at 18. That's with our full fleet available, and with staff. But sometimes we'll cap it at 12. So it depends on bike availability, staff availability, as well as folks who come and register. But usually, 12 to 18.
Can I bring my own bike?
Or yes.
Okay.
What we typically do is, as a first timer, we ask that people ride our bike, because somebody, what's happened in the past is somebody says, oh my gosh, I just discovered this thing. I'm going to go out and buy my bike, and I'm going to come do this clinic. Well, we quickly discovered that some people buy a bike that's modified, and sometimes it's not even to the it's modified to a point that the new owner that just came to our class isn't aware of, right? So, oh, the guy told me it was a stock bike, and they'll start the class and he'll just, loop the bike, or it'll get out of control. Wow. So that's why we highly recommend that first time it's on our bikes. And then if you get your bike, then you're welcome to bring it. It's discounted, and it frees up a bike for somebody else. So that's how we do it.
Yeah. Do you have to purchase insurance? Because that was one of the big things in the racing school that I attended up in here in Canada, was that they're like, the biggest problem with it was that when you bought the insurance, it was expensive at the time, and on top of that, it's like if you crash it, you're out for the day. So what I found was that actually limited my ability to try, and not to say I was pushing it, but it limits my ability to say, okay, let me go in this 5% more. Let me do a little bit more lean, because I'm like, hey man, it's like $1,000 for this insurance that I got to pay out, and I'm out for the rest of the day.
Yeah, I understand that. And with my background coming through the schools that I did, and where I did rent a bike, and I was aware of how they structured things. The one really important thing when we first started the clinics in 2013 was to eliminate that as much as possible.
Mm.
So there is no crash limit. There's no crash rule because of that very reason. If you were to come to our school and say, Eric, you know, we don't want, the intention should not be to crash the bike,
Sure.
but if you do crash the bike because you're pushing it, there's no additional fee to you. And typically, like I said earlier, the type of crash you'll have, you'll just dust off and keep learning. There might be a bent lever or something, the bike may need some attention, but we're not going to nickel and dime you. And that's something the bigger bike schools just can't do because the damage they take is more, right?
Of course.
But the bikes that we use crash really well. And the only times where we've had to put the brakes on somebody is when they are clearly every session they're going out and riding over their heads. And that's when we have to pull them aside and say, okay, if you continue this, then we're going to have to, we just have a talk with them, right? So that's rarely happened.
Of
But
course.
for the most part, we, you know, as long as you're not injured and you're able to continue, we can maintenance the bike or have a spare that you can go out and continue to learn and not worry about crashing the bike.
Have you ever had a student where you went out there that went on, and as soon as you saw them, or at the end of the day, you're like, my God, where have you been all your life? Like, motorcycle needs you. Have you had those kind of students come through as well? Like,
Oh,
you
I
could have
mean,
been a racer, or you can be a racer
oh
kind of
yeah,
thing.
yeah. And in fact, some of them, in fact, do, it's like the chocolate and the peanut butter coming together, right? It's like, oh my gosh, I just discovered this, and oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're here because, and then they continue, and they have,
Mm.
you know, they progress, they come back sometimes, or they go on and do great things. Either way, that's great. Um, and there, on the other side of that, there are folks that are just take to it naturally, and then they don't continue for whatever reason. Like you said earlier, there's so many other forms of entertainment or things they could put their attention to, um, that we see them maybe never again, but maybe also just sporadically over the years. When they like, oh, I miss coming out, I'll come out, and you're like, oh man, you could have been so good, right? I
Yeah.
actually, now that you jogged my memory, there's a couple people that are coming to mind that, man, they did actually go from clinic to racing, and it was really a pleasure to race with them because they brought up the level. You could see their form and everything, and it was so much fun to. They were good sportsmen, right? They had a good attitude. So those kind of people, yes, you really wish would get into it and stay with it. But sometimes, like I said, they move on.
Huh. Yeah. So where do you go from here? I mean, I want this worldwide, or at least statewide. So what is the vision, and what is the next step where you want to take M1GP?
Um, Thanks for asking that question. I don't have the answer. No, I'm kidding.
Okay.
Um, no, the answer, I do have the answer. There's some things I can't talk about, but most of it I can talk about. Basically, um, the school is something that we started in 13 that the previous organization didn't have, but it's
Mm.
something I'm really proud of, and I discovered that I really like working with people, training people, and when they have that glimmer in their eye when they have a breakthrough, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's like from black and white to HD color TV.
Right.
And so I really enjoy that when I work with people. Um, and so definitely the school. So and the school has kind of set us apart from other mini bike organizations because the reality of it is, and I've heard some other orgs say, oh, we're going to do that because they see what extra activity we have. But the flip side of it is there's a lot of work involved in
Mm.
school that is worth anything, right? So it's a lot of commitment. You know, I have me and my staff. We have to be there early. We have to work on the bikes really late sometimes, and so. But I'm not going to go into that whole, complaining about it because it's worth it in the end. So continue with that, grow it. Thankfully, we've had some industry people, including Honda North America, recognize what we're doing. They've supported us in the past, and we still have a relationship with them. Some other industry folks whose names I can't mention at the moment, but they're excited about doing some stuff with us. Have you heard of Babes Ride Out?
No.
Okay, so it's a really cool story. Look them up. It's a great thing. Basically two girlfriends just decided to go on a ride together, and they invited some more gal friends, and it just grew into this thing that we went to last year. We went to their Babes Ride Out here in California last year in October, and I think they had, if not over 1,700 participants, they had over 1,500, somewhere around there. So it turned
Wow.
into a huge thing with now sponsors, and we got to have a little demo area where we got to give sort of an intro to our rider clinics. And I can say this with confidence, every gal that came out and experienced it, I did it along with Jasmine, the gal who I mentioned earlier, and we trained them up for a kind of an abbreviated rider clinic.
Right.
And they all loved it, and they all wanted it. They gave us really good feedback. So happy to say that the Babes Ride Out folks want us back. So with this whole COVID-19, we'll see how that goes. But so lot of positive feedback from the community, and so we want to continue with that with the rider clinics. You know, with the racing series, that's still important. Some of the plans we have is to grow it. Hopefully, you know, like I said, with Moto America, they have a vision with Wayne Rainey and all the folks involved there, and I think that vision is in line with what I want to do. There may be some things that, you know, because they have so many balls to juggle anyway, so to speak. You know, the series that they're doing with the Ohvale, whether that expands or not, I still have some ideas that are for the same goal, but might be in a different lane. But you know, I definitely have some plans. M1GP. So here's something that our competitors aren't going to like to hear if they're watching your podcast. But this is our 12th year now, and Al Lyons ran CMRA for 16 years. I plan to do this until I'm not physically able to do it anymore. So hopefully that's, you know, another 12 years at least. I truly enjoy the sport. I love it. Love some of the people that I meet. If I look back, you know, I think about it sometimes because like I said, I really didn't want to be on the organizational side originally. I just wanted to race, but you know, having things happen the way they did, I'm happy that, you know, things evolved the way they did, because I've met a lot of great people, had a lot of great experiences. You know, not everybody's been great. There have been a few that, you know, obviously people, right? We're not going to get along with some, and like Rossi said when he was battling with Biaggi those years, he was, you know, it's normal. He says in life sometimes you have to deal with people you don't like.